Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin my statement, my thoughts and prayers are with those affected by the events in Southport, and I am sure that the whole House will join me in paying tribute to our emergency services who are dealing with this ongoing situation. Mr. Speaker, on my first day as Chancellor of the Exchequer, I asked Treasury officials to assess the state of public spending. That work is now complete, and I am today presenting it to this House. In this statement, I will do three things. First, I will expose the scale and the seriousness of what has been uncovered. Second, I will lay out the immediate action that we are taking to deal with the inheritance. And third, I will set out our longer-term plans to fix the foundations of our economy. Let me take each of these in turn. First, the inheritance. Before the election, I said that we would face the worst inheritance since the Second World War. Taxes at a 70-year high, debt through the roof, an economy only just coming out of recession. Mr. Speaker, I knew all of these things. I was honest about them during the campaign and the difficult choices that it meant. And the British people knew them too. That is why they voted for change. But upon my arrival at the Treasury 3 weeks ago, it became clear that there were things that I did not know. Things that the party opposite...
Order. This is an important statement for your constituents. Sorry? It's important to my constituents to hear as well. If I'm struggling to hear it, they're struggling at home as well. So please, you'll all get your chance to question. I think it's more important to hear and then comment. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Things that the party opposite covered up. Covered up from the opposition, covered up from this House, covered up from the country. That is why we're today publishing a detailed audit of the real spending situation, a copy of which will be laid in the House of Commons library. I want to take this opportunity to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, for his leadership, and to Treasury officials for all their work in producing this document. Now let me explain what it has uncovered. Mr. Speaker, the government published its plans for day-to-day spending in the spring budget in March. But when I arrived at the Treasury, on the very first day, I was alerted by officials that this was not how much the previous government expected to spend this year. It wasn't even close. In fact, the total pressures on these budgets across a range of areas was an additional £35 billion. Once you account for the slippage in budgets you usually see over a year, and the reserve of £9 billion designed to respond to genuinely unexpected events, it means, Mr. Speaker, that we have inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public finances now. Not in the future, but now. £22 billion of spending this year that was covered up by the party opposite. If left unaddressed, it would mean a 25% increase in the budget deficit this year. So I will today set out the necessary and urgent work that I have already done to reduce that pressure on the public finances by £5.5 billion this year and over £8 billion next year. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about costs for future years that they signed up to but did not include, like the compensation for infected blood, which has cross-party support. I'm not talking about the state of public services in the future, like the crisis in our prisons, which they have left for us to fix. I'm talking about the money that they were already spending this year and had no ability to pay for, which they hid from the country. They had exhausted the reserve, and they knew that, but nobody else did. Yet they ducked the difficult decisions. They put party before country. And they continued to make unfunded commitment after unfunded commitment, knowing that the money was not there, resulting in the position that we have now inherited. The reserve, spent more than 3 times over, only 3 months into the financial year. And they told no one. Mr. Speaker, the scale of this overspend is not sustainable. Not to act is simply not an option. We have already seen official ONS figures this month showing that borrowing is higher this year than the OBR expected. And the disaster of Liz Truss's mini-budget shows what happens if you don't take tough decisions to maintain economic stability. Some, including the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor, have claimed the books were open. How dare they? It is not true. And let me tell you why. There are very clear instances of specific budgets that were overspent and unfunded promises that were made, but that crucially, the OBR was not aware of for their March forecast. I will now take each of these in turn. First, the asylum system. The forecast for the number of asylum seekers has risen dramatically since the last spending review, and costs for asylum support have risen sevenfold in the past 3 years. But instead of reflecting these costs in the Home Office budget for this year, the previous government covered up the true extent of this crisis and its spending implications. The document I am publishing today reveals a projected overspend on the asylum system, including their failed Rwanda plan, for this year alone, of more than £6.4 billion. That was unfunded and it was undisclosed. Next, in the wake of the pandemic, demand for rail services fell. But instead of developing a proper plan to adjust for this new reality, the government handed out cash to rail companies to make up for passenger shortfalls, but failed to budget for this adequately. Because of that, and because of industrial action, there is now an overspend of £1.6 billion in the transport budget. That was unfunded and it was undisclosed. Mr. Speaker, since 2022, the government, with the support of this whole House, has rightly provided military assistance to Ukraine in response to the Russian invasion. The spending audit has found that there was not enough money set aside for the reserve to fund all these costs. We will continue to honour these commitments in full. And unlike the previous government, we will make sure that they are always fully funded. On top of these new pressures, since 2021, inflation was above the Bank of England's target for 33 months in a row, hitting 11% at its peak. But the previous government had not held a spending review since 2021. That means they never fully reflected the impact of inflation in departmental budgets. This has had a direct impact on budgets for public sector pay. When the last spending review was conducted, it was assumed that pay awards would be 2% this year. Ordinarily, the government is expected to give evidence to the pay review bodies on affordability. But extraordinarily, this year, the previous government provided no guidance on what could or could not be afforded to the pay review bodies. This is almost unheard of, but that is exactly what they did. Worse still, the former Education Secretary had the pay review body recommendations sitting on her desk. But instead of responding and dealing with the consequences, they shirked the decisions that needed to be taken. I will not repeat their mistakes. Where the previous government provided no transparency to the public and no certainty for public services, we will be open about the decisions which are needed and the steps that we are taking. That begins with accepting in full the recommendations of the